We had an opportunity to meet with the MVP program last month. Jim Whiten had scheduled a meeting to float a few ideas that he had or others had, and I was invited to attend. Michael and Amy were also there, and we get some feedback on this initial project concept from Courtney Roca, who's the South Coast coordinator for the MVP program. Courtney works for DP. And the feedback we got was pretty good. She, said that the project has potential to be approved and funded as a Type 1 project. She gave us emphasized and gave us some tips on things that we really need to hit pretty heavily in our application, emphasizing broad community support, showing that we've reached out to many different local groups and organizations and that they support this concept. The program overall has a big focus on environmental justice and making sure that the needs of people who are vulnerable to climate change or disproportionately vulnerable are not only represented, but are at the table. And she said we have the ability to request funding to support somebody from any environmental justice communities to be a liaison to this project, and then any innovative approaches. She really liked some of the outreach ideas we had and encouraged us to, things like working with the high school and maybe getting them involved in some of the multimedia things that we're thinking about. She also pointed to what she called a very successful program on Martha's Vineyard that they funded, MVP funded 2 years ago, and that they completed last year. And I can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So right now we've submitted an expression of interest. There is an opportunity to submit a written description of your project and get feedback from the MVP staff. We submitted that on January 6th, and we hope to start getting some feedback. I think the full application is going to be due sometime in June. We've prepared an outline and a roadmap for the full application based on last year's application process. Courtney said it would most likely be very similar. We kind of know what types of information we need to be collecting and working on right now. And we started drafting sections of that application. A couple of other things that are going on. There's an MVP webinar on January 8th on community-based problem solving that I think, those of us who are working on this are probably going to try and to attend, and anybody else is welcome to attend. And we should be able to follow up with MVP, with Courtney, up until the request for responses comes out, which she expects might happen in March. Here's that information on the webinar. I'm going to post all of this in the chat, these links at the end. So don't worry about trying to go over here or copy this down, but it's on January 18th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. This is our roadmap, and this kind of gives us an idea of where we need to be, gaining some of these points in the evaluation. You can see that there are a total of 9 sections to the application, each of which gets a different number of points, or there's a different number of points available. Remember I mentioned environmental justice, that number 4, there's 14 points there. Public involvement, community engagement, 12 points. So we need to make sure that we are trying to get as many of these points as we can in each section. The status column there, and I can share this later, it just kind of tells you where we're at in terms of pulling that information together and what our needs are right now. There's 10 points that are available for the overall quality of the application that are allotted at the discretion of the MVP team. So in looking at what we need for the application, some of the time sensitive things that maybe we want to be discussing are first the match. And I was under the impression, we were under the impression that there was a 25% match, but that's actually not spelled out in last year's application. So that's probably a question we need to ask Courtney, get some clarification on. We did take a look at the Martha's Vineyard project and understand how their match was compiled, and I can share some information on that. We may be able to follow that model. But we need, some commitment from the town that there will be a certain amount of staff time available to support this project. The next thing will be this emphasis on community support. Courtney suggested and recommended that insofar as we can get letters of support to accompany our application from different organizations, the review team reads all of those and they count for a lot. And our subcommittee has already started brainstorming organizations that we may want to contact and actually making some of those contacts. And then given that the Martha's Vineyard project was held out as a good model for us to follow, I think it would make sense to look at that program in more detail and talk with their staff. I was trying to figure out a way to describe the Martha's Vineyard program, but this diagram from their final report probably shows it as best as I can. It was really a combination of public engagement, working groups, public meetings throughout the year, focused on different topics, just similar to how we're focusing on health, water, infrastructure, security, agriculture. They've got some additional those and some additional ones here. You see transportation infrastructure. Reading the report, one of the things that is unique to the island there is that they showed some data on the number of ferry cancellations year to year, and that's been increasing because of weather. And that leads to issues that we don't quite have here, isolation and supply and things like that. But they had meetings on all these different topics, and then they're doing outreach and education on the outcome of those activities. They have a really, really nice website, very vineyard-like, little lush photographs, and things like that. I urge you to check it out. It's called The Vineyard Way, thevineyardway.org. And then they completed this with a final climate action plan that is also a very nice report. We're not going to be including that action plan right this time. Courtney said funding for that is very competitive, but the outreach part of it, she thought would be, again, very fundable. This is kind of how their budget for Martha's Vineyard broke down. They had 7 tasks. Their total budget, including their in-kind match, was $240,000. Their in-kind match, which ended up around 28% of the total, was $68,000. So the grant award was for $173,000. That's obviously more than that's a large amount. That's for a broader set of activities than what we'd be proposing, and it's also for a large area. It covered all of Dukes County, not just
Jeff, was that 1 year or more than 1 year?
That was a 1-year program, John. So 173,000 of that, about 40% was labor and 60% was other direct costs. Those other direct costs included costs for venue rentals for meeting facilities. They had contractor support in the areas of facilitation and designing their website and writing their report. They had some speaker fees. They did some translation of their materials into Portuguese. They invested in banners and posters that could be used to advertise their activities, and they had some travel back and forth between the vineyard and the mainland and Cuttyhunk, I think. The components of our project, it's really up in the air. We can decide, we can shape it however we want. Our subcommittee has brainstormed, a number of things that start with branding the effort. We should have something recognizable, just an entity or a thing called Resilient Westport or whatever we decide to call it that we can refer to and can start, becoming recognized. Things like banners, for, to take to events and have a booth or a table would make some sense. Possibly a banner over Main Road that we could put up. We talked at other meetings about the evacuation route signage, potential to work with the highway department. I don't know if there are regulations that prohibit branding of signage like that, but maybe there's something we could work on. We even thought about, maybe we have a mascot, somebody who could dress up in a costume as Resilient Man or Resiliento or something like that, and appear at different events. Might be kind of fun and innovative. There's lots of events where we could participate in that have some alignment with what we're trying to do. There's one rule of outreach is meet people where they gather and talk to them and use the communication tools that they use. So these are just some of the ideas. Public workshops around these different topic areas, guest speaker series, getting out and interviewing people in the community, businesses, farmers, fishermen, potentially doing video interviews and posting those on our social media. The website is probably a requirement that we want to do. Take the resiliency pledge, invite people to take a pledge, and they would get recognized for doing so, that they're going to do practice resilience in their own life and with their own property, based on recommendations that we would provide them, other things like that. I mentioned the letters of support. This is our brainstorm list, and the highlights are organizations we're already starting to talk to. So if you have contacts with any of these organizations or other suggestions, please let us know, and we welcome anybody on this committee taking the lead on making those contacts. We have a backgrounder piece together that describes the grant application and what we'd like to see in a support letter. So that may be helpful to provide to them. So that's where we're at. I will take these links and post them in the chat, and Amy, you can take me off share if you want.
I think all you have to do is just stop presenting.
Okay.
So while we're doing that, two quick things. One, Jeff, the planning board met on Tuesday and voted to endorse this application. They're not on your list of recommended entities, but we will draft a letter and you'll have that. Secondly, I do want to endorse Jeff's recommendation to our group to look at the experience on the vineyard and to check out, I guess the easiest way to do that is to go into thevineyardway.org and look at that. And the reason I commend that to you is to what degree we want to set our expectations. Right now, we have on the order of magnitude 2 or 3 dozen people, maybe 4 dozen people involved in this effort from Westport. And I would guess on the vineyard, they have several thousand, maybe more from what I could gather in terms of looking at the material in the vineyard. And that didn't happen by accident. That happened with, you saw that organization chart timeline that Jeff put up with lots and lots of meetings and speakers and everything else. But if they didn't get the whole community involved, they came pretty darn close to getting the whole community involved. And I guess, you get the whole community involved if people think it's important. If people don't think it's important, then you don't. And so this is a little bit chicken and an egg. They're not going to think it's important unless they have a certain amount of information. But I get back to, where do we want to set our expectations? Do we think it's successful if we have 60 or 80 people doing this work? Or do we think it's successful if we have 2,000 or 3,000 people involved in this? What are our expectations? And I think a good way to get a picture of one definition of success is to look at that Vineyard Way and get a sense of the energy there and say, is that what we want to strive for? And then we could have that kind of discussion. And I think that the MVP grant is a way to help build towards that, if that's what we want to do. I would make one minor correction at the outset of Jeff's, in terms of we're aiming for the phase one level of MVP, not because we don't have shovel-ready projects. We do have shovel-ready projects, the East Beach, the Let, and so on. We've just been informed by MVP that they're not interested in those shovel-ready projects because of where they're located. So this is the best project that MVP is interested in. And so if we're going to get MVP funding, this is absolutely the best target for MVP. And I really appreciate, Jeff, you, Michael Burris, and others who've been involved in getting us this far towards this application. Thank you very much. Now, are there other members who are on this call who are either have questions of Jeff or suggestions of how we proceed? And either, raise your hand or hit the raise your hand icon at the bottom of the screen. I don't see it. Oh, David Cole and then Michael Yagman. David.
Okay. I just wanted to mention, we need to realize that Martha's Vineyard is a county and not a town. It's a very coherent set of towns in that county, but it's a somewhat different scale. And we have a very incoherent county, I think, in Bristol County. And so we need to kind of set our sights in terms of a municipality, a town. And I think we can just see what all they did and learn from it, but fit it to our level. And I think we can make a lot of use of it, and I think it will be very helpful. But I commend Jeff. I think he's done a terrific job of pulling this together. And so let's just think of it as how our town is going to move forward on this. And I'm really happy that we have a representative from the environmental club at the high school joining this, because I think that's one of the important outreach activities that we need to do, but there are many others. So this is a starter, and I think it's a great, we've got a great platform from which to leap. Thank you.
Lily, you will be called on in the future. I'm giving you some warning on that. So don't use that as an excuse to leave the meeting, but I'm just giving you a heads up here. Michael.
Well, you echoed my comment, John. I want to thank Jeff and David for taking us down this road and all their good work, and for reaching out to Lily. And I just think it's going to be critical. And I am eager to meet with Lily and the students at the school and talk about the kind of impact that climate is going to have on their futures. And I think we can really engage them to be advocates to to get to that level of community engagement that we think is critical for a successful application. So Lily, you are our dream to get the community engaged.
Thank you very much, Michael. Jake McGuigan, your hand is raised.
Yeah, how you doing? I think the problem you're going to have on the community engagement is finding a way to make people realize that it's good, could impact their lives. I think the most recent storm we had, if you have pictures, sharing those pictures, again, can we attribute the storm that came through? No, I mean, it's kind of a perfect storm with lunar high tides and southeast winds and various other things. But I think finding a way for them to basically attribute it to their kind of real world scenario. I was down at the head, took pictures of that. People go down to the beach right now and say, well, what the heck happened? I'm like, well, we lost 30 feet of dune, got eaten away in that storm. And you see the people mortified when they go to Horseneck Beach right now. I mean, Horseneck Beach was in rough shape before. If anyone wants to go take a look at Horseneck now, it's almost like an uninhabitable space now. I don't know how you're going to get to the water or anything like that. So I think those are the eye-opening things that you can use to, I guess, scare people to actually get involved. But that's just my firsthand thought based on what we saw in that storm a couple weeks ago and what it did to the point, what it did to the harbor, what it did to the head of Westport. So thank you.
I think that's a great point, Jake. Jeff?
Yeah, just echoing Jake's comment. I went down to the point and took a couple of pictures. That picture I had on the opening slide was one of them, and I did post that on the Westport Facebook page. And if you're looking for ways to get people's attention, that's a good way. That photo and a couple of others got over several hundred reactions, and many people shared it and were quite aghast at what they saw. So I think that does show the power of social media in our world today, and I think it's an important tool for us. The other thing I wanted to say, John, is that we need not only ideas on who to work with and things like that, but this whole project concept, I think, needs input from the other committees. We haven't yet heard a lot about what the committees are finding as their priorities and what they think we should be talking to the community about. So we need, maybe a separate meeting where the folks on the engagement committee, have a brainstorming session with representatives from each of the other committees.
Duly noted. And I know you have reached out to all of the subcommittees, and our subcommittees. Some of them have been extremely active, others less so. And you've had difficulty getting response back. So that's something we've got to tackle. And it may be that one of the ways we tackle it is if we get some resources from MVP. When do you, in the schedule of the MVP, when do you hear back whether you're successful, Jeff?
Just based on last year, the applications were due in June, and I think the awards were made in September.
So we wouldn't know until September.
Most likely.
Okay.
Courtney's back on the 20th, and she didn't have a lot of information on the timeline when we met with her, but there may be more information coming soon because it needs to get out there.
Okay. Thank you. David, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just one brief thought. I thought Jeff's picture of the recent storm and the flooding at the point, and but there were, if you go to the East Bay, Rhode Island newspaper's website, you'll see dozens of pictures of the effects of that storm, and several of the pictures are pictures of Courtney Rocha out on the causeway and on East Beach Road observing the storm, and she's our MVP consultant and advisor for this area. So she certainly was exposed to the effects of that. And I would just say that the effects were approximately the same as those that occurred in 1991 from Hurricane Bob, which was the last hurricane that we had. So this was just a kind of winter storm, strong winds on a high tide at high moon. The moon was right, the tide was right, and the wind was whatever it was, moderate, but it wasn't a hurricane. And it brought in the same flooding down at the point that we had in 1991 in our last hurricane. So I think it's a fair warning and something that we need to build upon. And certainly the people in town have been made aware of it. And Shorelines was very effective in trying to inform us about it. So I think those are all helpful things for our cause. Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Jeff?
Yeah. So my understanding, I don't know if anybody else has heard this or confirmed it, was that was about a 3-foot storm surge.
Yes.
And that, if you look at the modeling, that is what is projected, for the daily high tides in 2030 to 2050. If that's true, that could be a powerful way of communicating what we're in for in the future. If that kind of tide is going to be coming in every day or even every month.
And that is just one effect of global warming, storm surge, and increasing storms, increasing sea level rise. Just one impact. Drought is another. Increasing number of days over 90. I mean, the list is a long list, but that's just one. And I think that Jake's point about how do you communicate things that people pay attention to, as I've said before, the biggest difficulty is everyone, it's human nature, want a sense of normalcy. And how do you explain that these are not normal times when you have 420 parts per billion? It's not normal times. I mean, hasn't been that way in over 1 million years. And there are lots of ramifications of that. It's physics and chemistry. And I mean, it's just basic science. So, Jim Whiten, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we at the planning board preemptively supported this process. That the other issue that I have is the problems that Courtney saw on the Causeway and East Beach are not going to be items that MVP is going to fund. We've already tried that with the LET. And in the rehash of why our application didn't go forward, Courtney said we scored about half of the 100 points that are available because we didn't have environmental justice. It's an area that's going to be flooded anyway, and we should be trying to get people to retreat instead of put some infrastructure in place. And so I just don't know if this process, this public engagement, is going to get people enthused about looking at these issues, especially along East Beach and the head of Westport and the Point. I'm afraid we won't have any funding sources for any of that. So I just wanted to throw that out and see what the end result of this, getting this grant, if it's successful, what is success?
Yeah, I don't think anybody has an answer to that right now. It's an important question. But I think you do raise a a good issue, Jim, if there is messaging that will help build community consensus just for further support of some of the things that, we feel need to be done. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what those, what those messages should be and how we reach people and build that into this program.
Let me, we've got 3 more hands up where it's 5:45. This may turn into a meeting that is entirely devoted to this, which is not a problem as far as I'm concerned. But David Cole and then Michael and then Jake again.
Okay, I just wanted to say, I think that the MVP grant that you've been talking to Courtney about and that Jeff is talking about is focused on things that they may be inclined to do. I don't think they're going to be a big money source for solving some of the other problems, but I think this can help us build a community consensus and understanding that will then provide a basis for moving on in other directions to try to seek funding as needed to do the other things to solve the other kinds of problems. But this is a community consensus building effort that we're looking to them to help us carry it out. And I just really appreciate how Jeff has taken the lead in putting this together. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Michael.
Yeah, I just think that the framework I've always fallen back on, which one of my mentors framed for me, was there are 3 components to policy change. One was education, which we can work with, I think, the students as a base to disseminate the information to the community. The place where we're stuck, I think the second component is strategies. The third component is political will, but you can't generate political will without concrete strategies that have a solution. And that's where I think our next task is going to be, to figure out what are our specific strategies that are fundable, implementable, and specific to Westport. We talked about the heat impact in North Westport. We need to think about concrete strategies and solutions that are fundable.
Thank you, Jake.
The only thing that came to mind on an education outreach, I know that's a bigger project with the MVP funding and all that, but I mean, what do we give out? 3,000 beach passes a year? How much work is it to put in a small little insert into the beach pass that goes out to say, hey, you're losing your beach.
Yeah.
it's and maybe if you want to get slightly involved or whatever, join what I'm just thinking out, more.
That's a great idea, Jake.
Can be done, but I mean, you mail out a beach pass, so you could always do an insert in there or something like that. Just an educational component. Shouldn't cost a lot of money. You got photocopy and printers, and it's going out anyway. So that was just off the top of my head. Thanks.
Great idea. Lily, if I could put you on the spot for a second, climate resiliency is, among other things, an issue of intergenerational injustice. That is, the causes of it are perpetrated by people of my generation, and the impacts are going to be suffered mostly by people of your generation. And it's always unfair to ask someone to speak for a lot of people. But I just wonder what you think. And, is this something that gets discussed in the schools, or are there other things that command your attention and this is just a sidelight? And again, welcome. We're so glad that you're part of this meeting, Lily. We hope it won't be your last. You're on mute.
Oh.
There you are.
Okay, sorry. We definitely do talk about it at the school, more on like a personal level, but not as much with the teachers. But we have like Mr. Silva, who runs the environmental club. Him and a couple other science teachers try and focus on it, but we don't really talk about it as a school on a whole. Just the environmental club, we try and focus on it and like put up posters and spread it like that, but not too much going on about it. But I hope we can do more in the future.
Tell us about the environmental club. How many people are on it? And
Um,
how do you talk about this issue of resilience or global warming? How do you talk about it?
I'd say we have about like 10 to 15. It like changes every week. We're a pretty new club, so we haven't done too much, but we've really just like put up posters, like done research. We've worked with the Audubon Society and the Watershed Alliance. We're working on making a pollinator garden to put in the back of the school, and we're gonna go to the elementary school and like teach them about pollinator gardens and climate change. Hopefully we're gonna do that in the future, but that's all we've really done so far because we're a pretty fairly new school club.
Thank you, Lily. As I said, we hope that we'll get your contact information so you'll get notice of these meetings in the future. And this group is broken up into this big committee, and all are welcome. You can certainly tell other members of the club. And then we have subcommittees. You've been hearing about the outreach committee, but we have committees on water, agriculture, infrastructure and safety, and health as well. So if you or other members of your club, environmental club, are interested in getting in more detail in any of those areas, someone whose parents might run a farm might be, for example, interested in agriculture, then that's a way to drill down deeper into those areas. So we hope we'll see you at more of these meetings. Michael Burris, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. So just one thing that I wanted to say really quick is that part of the impetus for this grant is to help develop the capacity of the Climate Resiliency Committee, in light of the fact that my office doesn't really have the staff time to dedicate to the Climate Resilience Committee that I think it deserves. So hopefully if we receive an award, we can get another person to work with, whether it be a part-time or full-time capacity, depending on what the award is, to help coordinate, not only coordinate some of the CRC's regular work, but help out with other projects. So like at East Beach or other things that don't necessarily have to do with the south end of Westport, like planning for some of the more public health oriented aspects of climate change in Westport. So there's a common thing that I've heard as concerns for seniors and homes that don't have air conditioning. And so other initiatives like that maybe my office can't give full attention to.
That's a very good point. All right. I think we have given feedback that you need. If Michael or Amy could circulate to the not membership list, but the mailing list of the CRC, the list of organizations, Jeff, that you had that you're seeking letters of endorsement from, with maybe some points that these organizations might make in writing letters of support, then that could be a homework assignment for us, because I'm sure all of us have connections to one or two of those groups, and we could start getting you those letters of support. If Amy or Michael could do that, that would be helpful. And yeah.
We'll do that for you. And also, I made note to share the MVP training for next week. I'll circulate that with the
that would be great.
Yeah.
And Lily, if you want someone involved in the CRC to come and talk to the environmental club, would you, through Michael Burris, let us know? I'm sure I or someone would be happy to do that and help talk to your club about who we are and what we do. Let's move on from engagement and fundraising for brief reports. Jake and I attended the Water Committee meeting on December 15th. Minutes were written by Michael Sullivan. This is, as I've said, been a very active committee. The next meeting for anyone who's interested is going to be February 16th at 6 p.m. By Zoom. And I'm not going to go over the minutes. If you want them, you can get them from Amy or Michael. But I just want to say that this committee is very active and it keeps moving along with all the water-related issues, what the problem is, and what can be done to meet those challenges. Unless, Jake, you think there's something really important that we ought to talk to the full committee about.
No, I think you covered it. I think we're in a good spot right now and coming up with some pretty decent recommendations and limiting it down to, in typical fashion, we started with probably 20 different issues.
Yeah.
But we've been able to kind of get that down to about 5 or 6 that are really, really pressing, and that will, move forward with a recommendation to the whole committee.
Yep. Infrastructure and safety, Bob Daler's here. Bob?
Yes, John, briefly, I think just touching for a moment on the points that Jeff made earlier. The storm that we saw was, typical nor'easter, just happened to coincide with, a full moon, high tide, and the kind of thing that gave, allowed the surge. And we will see more of that. And, we can, when we start to look at the actual data related to the storm, we can look at the actual wind speeds and everything. But it was a typical storm, and you can see the effects of that, and we're bound to see that more in the future, which leads to one of the points that Jeff made earlier of marking the flood hazard areas and evacuation routes, which the town has not done, and that's sort of a short money infrastructure possibility in which you'd actually get some safety benefits for communities, so that they, and over again we see in flooded areas in California in which people drive into flooded low spots, and perhaps those of us near the coast are wiser than that, but we can't count on that. So marking both evacuation routes and flood hazard areas, and maybe if we raised funds, that would be something that a branding opportunity on those signs. In a not small item, we continue to look at the harbor water situation, in which they're seeing continued salinity and salinity controls and seasonal bacterial contamination of their water supplies, and as sea levels rise, that will be something which will just get worse and worse. So the town has engaged Weston and Sampson, and Weston & Sampson has completed their initial screening opportunity to build a more comprehensive water supply away from the water's edge. The geology doesn't work for us very well here in Westport, and that we have very shallow depths to bedrock. Most of the wells, most people's drinking water supplies are coming out of bedrock wells, and the larger producing of those wells are along faults and fractures in the rock. So those faults and fractures in the rock convey water, and the more producing wells have captured those. So they have Weston and Sampson has done a screening of on base geology mapping and pulled together all the existing well data in the harbor portion of the town. So this is from Crossroads, down to the ocean, and has looked at areas which are most favorable. The next step in refining that would be to do non-invasive ground penetrating radar, those kinds of attempts on the most favorable sites. And there are about 2 or 3 which look favorable. Some of those are in lands that are held in conservation restrictions. So there's that possibility as well. So the very next step, we met with the committee on December 16th. The next step is to do this non-invasive testing of the most favorable sites. And then depending on the outcome of those, to actually go back and do test drilling. So we're in an area that is both subject to the storm approach, but they're also subject to the kind of chronic effects of sea level rise, increasing salinity, inundation, or reducing the depth of separation between septic systems and the groundwater, all of the kind of chronic things that we'll see related to an increasing sea level. So there's a project that is going forward which will have a significant price tag, and although not directly related to climate change, the town is moving forward and acting to both comment on and sort of protect its citizens from the DEP regulations, which are going to be changing, requiring nitrogen reducing systems for everyone's septic system. We believe that the town, from all the work that the town has been doing and the planning work and the work of this committee, we should be able to move to defer the 5-year action requirement by entering into the water management planning process. So that there's a lot to do on the infrastructure side.
All right, thank you, Bob, very much. We welcome Michael Sullivan. I just gave you a report on the water committee, Mike. It was very brief. I just said you were active and when the next meeting was. I didn't go into detail on it, but I said you had written excellent minutes and people could get them through the planning department if they wanted. Do you want to elaborate more on your good work? Jake also amplified a bit as well.
It doesn't sound as though it needs any more going over, and I'm sure you and Jake did a fine job, so that's fine. I must have had the meeting time wrong. I had 6 o'clock. Was it 5 o'clock?
No, 5 o'clock.
My apologies.
You're in the wrong time zone, Mike.
My apologies.
Your section of Cherry and Webb's in a different time zone.
That's very possible.
I'd like to add one thing to what Bob was saying. And yeah, go ahead.
At the watershed, we've been taking a good look and having conversations with a number of people about the Title V changes that are burgeoning right now, and we'll probably have a nice little information packet or pamphlet that will come out in the next week or two to our members and the general public. So amplifying what the number of questions and the clarifications that Bob and the rest of the planning, you folks at the planning board are trying to, to get feedback on from DEP. So look for that in the next week or two.
I have two hands raised. Jeff, you're up first. Then David Cole. Jeff.
I had a question for Bob or anybody else who might know, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask anyway. My question is whether the town, after an event like we saw the Christmas week, is there any kind of damage assessment that's documented on what the consequences were?
Other than we know the effort that the DPW or the highway department spent in clearing off East Beach Road. I think other than that, and there is, I know that there's a pretty good photographic, at least documenting the observations around the time of high tide at various locations. So it's, and we know that the dune broke through Atlantic Avenue, and we know that those spots of flooding and roughly the extent of flooding, but there's to my knowledge, but there's no financial analysis or damage analysis.
Okay.
David Cole.
I just mentioned that there's a very good letter in today's Shorelines from the Board of Health on this DEP regulation, and saying that we have done things in the past and we're doing things now that should meet this requirement, and so it won't be so onerous. But they still think that the DEP requirement is pretty stupid. So anyway, read the letter in the Shorelines.
Thank you. Michael Sullivan. You're on mute, Michael.
Thanks, John. If you want, I missed, was it Jeff or who asked the question about the damage by the tide, the high tide? I can, if you'd like, I can share my screen really quickly to show you the tide.
No, we've already mentioned that it was 3 feet, which you had mentioned, I think, in our at the meeting. So thank you. Jake McGuigan.
So this may be kind of an unpopular opinion, but with the harbor, why are we looking at that as a public water supply for people that purchase homes that know there's a water is an issue there? And it may be for outside of this discussion, but would somebody come and help out, someone in Northwestport that has a well issue? And I think you're going to have a big problem if, talking about conservation lands or trying to build infrastructure on conservation lands for people in Westport Harbor. Because we have people talking about East Beach saying, well, maybe we should just step away from it. Yet we have something in the harbor which is being impacted by climate change and could be underwater for all we know in 50 years. Why would we spend millions of dollars on an infrastructure project to deliver water to people in the harbor that technically bought houses knowing that it's difficult to have water there? You go to Westport Point and people have 1,500 gallon storage tanks and get bento to deliver water, just like we had to do this summer. So that's just probably outside of the scope of this call, but I think that's something that the town and others may want to think about in the future if we're talking about millions and millions of dollars in infrastructure in the harbor.
I don't think it's outside this call at all, because I think the issue of retreat is a policy issue that we have to wrestle with, Westport has to wrestle with. It's clearly what MVP has essentially put on the table with their decision that they don't want to invest in infrastructure on East Beach or the Let. So they're saying, we're not going to invest. It provokes the question, should we be investing, which is the question you were asking, Jake. And so I think that is, it's a difficult question. And it's one thing if people want to invest their private money in a vulnerable place. It's another question about whether the public should be investing. And I don't know what the answer is there. I don't know where you draw the line, but I think it is a legitimate question. And who better to have that discussion than our committee? Not tonight. Not tonight.
No, but I just want to, Jake, I just want to say the very same people who are planning to help the citizens who live in the harbor, the people who are actually providing water supply or planning water supply and have water supply and design to the very same people that live in the north end of town. It is, you know, it's their, it is the status of solving problems, and who pays for them is a legitimate question. But the idea of, yes, we're working just as hard for someone who has a contaminated well in the north end in a little house and has no possibility to get whacked for $30,000 or $35,000 to upgrade their system. We're working as hard as we can to bring them water so they don't have to face that.
Thank you, Bob. So topic for another day, Michael Burris, if you'll put down something on a note for future discussion. Jim Whiten.
Yeah, I just wanted to reply to Jake. We're doing a number of things that could seem to be for a particular neighborhood, and we're not trying to foist the cost of these things on the town. I think we are also about ready to apply for a grant to the Buzzards Bay National Estuaries Project for a combined sewage treatment for the Let, for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Street and Bayside Restaurant. These structures that are there, some of them are cesspools, some of them are Title V systems that don't denitrify, but they're so close to the river there. As a group, the only thing that makes sense on those small lots is a combined system. And so we're looking to get a grant for 100% plan. And then the question of how to pay for it is a secondary question. I don't think it would be on the ratepayers of the entire town, but it is almost impossible for a neighborhood group to do these things for themselves. And we have the ability as a municipal system or as a water or sewer district to get long-term funding, which could then be paid by the rate owners, the ratepayers. But the only way to do it is to do it from really the municipality level. And I think Bob Daler would agree with that. And this would be sort of a test case of what do we do with the rest of these little summer communities that are now full-time on small lots up and down the river. We have, a dozen or 14 of them on the East Branch alone. And really, those places do not have the ability to handle their septic systems. If they're required to put in denitrifying systems like DEP is suggesting, it would be, you wouldn't have a yard left, and I don't know that you would be able to really do it. So this is a test, but all these things are a test to see what we can do as a town to make the place livable.
All right, thank you. Moving right along, sort of. All right, health and agriculture. I'm looking to see if there is anyone present from either health or agriculture. I don't see anyone.
Well, I'm
So,
on health, but I haven't attended a meeting recently, so I don't really have an update.
thank you, Shauna. So, I think,
Health
Yeah.
as well.
oh, yeah, Mike,
But, we haven't met. And I
Okay.
think the only thing I've seen from our chair is that he's working on the emergency response system with the various municipal organizations to upgrade its capacity.
okay. Well, that will do for the report. And I do think we have a good health committee. It's well populated and, they have done a considerable amount of work. I'm more worried about agriculture, which needs reinforcements. And I especially get worried if we get closer to summer, where it's going to be very hard for people who know ag to find the time. So we need to find a way to get reinforcements to agriculture, and I'm open to suggestions. I'll stop by Hay Rays and talk to Ray again about ways to do that. But I'm open. If people have suggestions, send me an email. With that, other business, recommendation to the Board of Selectmen to appoint Michael Yagman to the CRC. Do we need a motion on that, or can I just say that's a sense of the meeting to do that? Any objections?
I think you could just recommend him. I don't think we need a motion.
Okay, that's a sense of the meeting. Who's going to argue with Shauna on that? Nobody. So, all right, so that's a sense of the meeting. Committee resources, I think we've really spent a good bit of time on that in the discussion on engagement and fundraising, at least in the area of engagement. I think so. Let's leave that covered for now. Next meeting date, we've been meeting the second Thursday every other month, which would mean that our next meeting of the full committee would be March 9th. That leaves the interim month period for subcommittees to meet. Does that make sense for people? Is March 9th at 5 o'clock okay for people?
Yes.
Okay, I don't hear any objections, so we'll set the next meeting at Thursday, March 9th, 5 o'clock. Got that, Sullivan? Okay, good. All right, then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We'll have a good weekend, everyone. Good Martin Luther King Day. Find a good way to celebrate that. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Michael. Lily, see you next time, I hope. Bye-bye.